The sun was warm on my skin, not the sun of this world, but the kind that only lives in memory. I could feel the weight of her hand in mine, soft, real, impossibly present. She laughed, the sound honeyed and effortless, like wind through olive trees in a place we never reached. Sophia's laughter echoed beside hers, higher, lighter, and I turned to watch her run through the tall grass, her arms stretched like wings. She was smaller than she is now, still chubby-faced, still stumbling a little when she ran, still calling out for her mother. And her mother, God, her mother. She wore white, not a wedding dress, not mourning, something between both. Her hair was down, cascading like black silk over her shoulders. Her lips were red, not painted, just alive. She looked at me with the kind of love that forgives everything. And I was someone else in that dream. Someone she had never left. Someone who hadn't buried her with his hands trembling. Sophia picked a flower, a wild one, and brought it to her. My wife bent to accept it, brushed her daughter's cheek with the back of her hand, kissed her forehead. It was a moment. One I would have killed to live in forever. One I had already killed for, in 100 ways. Then the wind shifted. The sky cracked in two. The sound came first. Gunshots, too close, too loud. Sophia screamed and I reached for her, but the grass was higher now, thicker, swallowing her legs. I couldn't move fast enough. My wife turned toward the noise, and I saw the red bloom against her chest before I even heard the last shot. She collapsed forward, her hands still reaching for our daughter. I fell to my knees as if something cut my tendons. I held her, felt the warmth drain from her skin like wine spilling across stone. Her eyes were still open, not afraid, just sad. Sad I hadn't kept my promise. Sad she wouldn't get to see Sophia grow. Sad I'd have to raise her alone. I screamed, but no sound came out. Only wind, only silence, only blood, and then darkness. I woke with my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Sheets twisted around my legs. The room was cold, too cold, and empty. My arm reached instinctively for a body that wasn't there, hasn't been there in years. I exhaled slow, the kind of breath that feels like it tears something on the way out. In the room down the hall, Sophia slept, unaware. I could picture her curled into a ball, thumb near her mouth, hair tangled around her face. Safe for now, for now. My world has no softness left, no warmth, only duty, only consequence. They want me to marry again. They want a woman to stand at my side, smile for the cameras, hold my daughter's hand. They want the illusion of peace, the promise of future. But I made no promises to them. Love for me is a wound that never closes. Marriage is a cage I once entered willingly, only to have it collapse in fire and steel. I don't want another woman in my bed. I don't want another heart bleeding in my hands. What I want doesn't matter. I will do what I must. I will choose one of them. 10 women lined up like offerings at an altar. 10 masks I'll be forced to touch. I'll bring Sophia to each one. Watch how they speak to her, look at her, tolerate her. She is the key. If one of them cannot love my daughter, she will never touch my life. And if one of them dares to love too much, God help her, because I won't. There's no room left in me for softness, no space for smiles that aren't forced. The garden is gone, my wife is gone, only Sophia remains, and the blood hasn't stopped.
If you've just arrived and haven't subscribed yet, I gently invite you to stay, to make this home yours too. And to you, who already walks beside me, your presence matters more than you know. A like, a comment, even a single word. It warms more than just the heart. It tells me I'm not speaking into the void. It reminds me that this story was never mine alone. It was always ours. Under the weight of my father's expectations and my sister's absence, I stood outside the black car that would take me to meet the man she was supposed to marry. My dress clung to me like obligation, my breath caught between rebellion and surrender. I could still hear his voice from earlier, Ruggiero's cold, commanding tone, telling me I owed this family more than silence, telling me that Valentina had run, and someone had to fix the damage. I was the patchwork, the stand-in bride, the sacrificial peace offering wrapped in satin. I hadn't even looked in the mirror before leaving. I didn't want to see her in me, the girl he was expecting. I didn't want to lie with my eyes, but I would, for now. The city passed in blurs of gray and gold as we drove. My hands rested on my lap, fingers tightening with every mile. The silence in the car was thick, but not heavier than the silence in me, the kind that comes before the storm. When the driver stopped outside the restaurant, I didn't wait for the door to be opened. I stepped out, heels steady, back straight, like I'd trained for this my whole life. Maybe I had. I walked in, expecting coldness, power, a stranger with too much darkness behind his eyes. But I didn't expect her, the little girl, sitting at the table like a porcelain doll someone forgot to protect. She had a napkin in her lap and a quiet defiance in her posture. Big eyes, hair pulled into a soft braid, fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. When her gaze met mine, I forgot how to breathe. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't impressed. She was watching, measuring me. And then I saw him, Vittorio. He didn't rise. He didn't smile. His presence was a wall, thick and impenetrable, and his eyes, dark, assessing, deliberate, locked onto mine with the weight of a man used to control. I walked toward them, every step echoing. My voice didn't falter when I spoke, though my heart threatened to bruise my ribs. I greeted them both, sat, smiled gently at the girl first, only then at him. He noticed. I knew he did. There was a flicker, something not quite approval, not quite suspicion, but enough to tell me he was reading everything. My words, my silences, my pulse. The conversation was minimal. He asked few questions. Most of them were for Sophia. He watched how I answered her, how I listened, how I leaned in when she spoke. He studied me as if I were an equation to be solved, or a lie he was waiting to catch midair. And maybe I was. Maybe I would be. But I wasn't Valentina. I wasn't polished or poised like her. I was raw, real. I came with cracks I never tried to seal, and somehow it felt like he was looking for those. Sophia dropped her fork. I bent to pick it up before the server could. Our hands brushed, hers and mine, small and warm. When I placed the fork back gently beside her plate, she whispered thank you without being told to, and he saw that too. His jaw tightened, not disapproving. Something else. Something unreadable. The meal passed in tension laced with civility, like a bomb dressed in lace. When the plates were cleared, he finally spoke directly to me in a way that cut through all the pretending. "You're not who they sent," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear. My throat closed, but I didn't look away. "No," I replied, "but I'm here." His eyes didn't soften, but something shifted. The air between us grew sharper, more dangerous, as if honesty was the most seductive lie of all. And then, without touching me, he dismissed me, politely, strategically, like a man who already knew whether I passed the first test. I walked out of that restaurant with my spine burning, not from shame, but from the heat of something awakening. He would not forget me, and I would not escape untouched.
She wasn't supposed to stay in my mind, but her voice lingered, not in the air, not in the room, but somewhere deeper, like a melody hummed too softly to forget. I sat in silence after she left, my fingers curled loosely around the rim of the glass, eyes still fixed on the empty chair where she had been. Sophia had already returned to her coloring, unaffected, but I was not. There was something off, something wrong and yet dangerously right, about the woman who dared to meet my gaze without trembling. She lied by omission, I was sure of it, but she didn't flinch when I saw through her. That intrigued me more than it should have. I told myself I brought Sophia to these dinners to test them, to see who would bend down to her level, who would speak to her with patience, without calculation. But the truth had begun to shift. With Arya, it wasn't a test. It was exposure. Hers, mine. Something about the way she watched my daughter, so gently, so unguarded, stirred something I hadn't felt in years, and I hated it. I hadn't intended to ask her anything, not beyond surface pleasantries, but the moment stretched, twisted, demanded truth. When I told her she wasn't the one they sent, I expected denial, panic. Instead, I got confession wrapped in poise. I'm here, not an excuse, a fact, and it landed like a claim. She moved like someone who didn't want to be saved, like someone who already knew what it meant to be owned. Later that night, I stood at the window of my office, the city lights casting long shadows on the floor, and I tried to remember the sound of my wife's laugh. I failed. That memory, once vivid, was crumbling. In its place, something new had taken root. A new scent, a new stare, a new lie. I poured another drink, not because I needed it, but because silence without distraction was too loud. I'd survived wars between families, lost friends, carved empires from ashes, but what I hadn't prepared for was the way a stranger could walk in wearing someone else's name and make my world tilt by an inch. She touched Sophia like she mattered. No hesitation, no forced affection, no panic in the presence of my silence. That wasn't normal. That wasn't trained, which meant she either belonged to this world already or was foolish enough to think she could learn it. Both were dangerous. The council would push for a decision soon, They were circling, whispering, wondering if I'd lost my edge. My refusal to remarry had been tolerated, barely. Now they wanted proof of control, legacy, obedience. But control was an illusion, and obedience, a dead man's game. I had no intention of playing by rules written by lesser men. Still, I couldn't shake the image of Arya's eyes as she sat across from me. There was fire there, not like Valentina's, sharp and cold, but something quieter, more enduring. She didn't want to be in that chair, but she hadn't run. That mattered. That always mattered. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Sophia stood there, small and barefoot, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Can't sleep," she whispered, eyes round. I opened my arms, and she climbed into them without hesitation, her head resting against my chest. For a moment, everything stopped. The power, the deals, the blood, just this. Her heartbeat sinking with mine, her breath warm on my neck. She was the only reason I still allowed softness in my life, the only one I'd kill the entire world to protect. As I carried her back to bed, I thought again of Arya, not as a wife, not as an enemy, but as a woman who had looked into the eye of a man like me and hadn't blinked. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most dangerous thing of all.
I didn't sleep that night. My body lay still beneath unfamiliar sheets, but my mind was restless, replaying every glance, every silence, every heartbeat from that dinner. The weight of Vittorio's eyes still pressed against my skin, as if he had left fingerprints on my thoughts. I could feel the tension he carried, not just power, not just grief, but something heavier, something sharp. And when he'd leaned in, when his voice had curled just for me, I'd felt the edge of a blade disguised as curiosity. He knew I wasn't Valentina, but he hadn't sent me away. That alone terrified me more than if he had. The silence of my room was a trap. My phone buzzed once. Father. I ignored it. Then again. I knew what he'd say, that I had to keep playing the part, that I had to finish what Valentina couldn't, that this was no longer about love or choice, that it never had been. For Ruggiero, daughters were currency, and I was the last coin in his pocket. Morning came with cruel clarity. The dress I'd worn still hung near the door, the faintest trace of Vittorio's cologne clinging to it. I wasn't sure if I hated that or craved it. Either way, I didn't touch it. I showered until the steam blurred the mirror, but not the ache in my chest. Every breath was a negotiation, every movement a rehearsal. I was still in her place, still wearing her fate. When the car came to pick me up again, I said nothing. The driver didn't either. We moved through the city like shadows, silent and sleek. I didn't ask where we were going. Part of me wanted to know. Part of me didn't. When the gates opened, the house that rose beyond them looked like something carved from stone and secrets. Not just wealth, not just power. Something older, something that had survived too much. I was led through a hall of glass and cold marble. Every step echoed. Every painting on the wall watched me. And then I heard her, Sophia, laughing. A high, real sound that didn't belong in a house like this. I followed the sound before anyone could stop me. She was in the garden, chasing a butterfly, her braid loose, her feet bare in the grass. For a moment she looked like any child, light, untouched. Then she saw me, and paused. Her smile didn't vanish, but it changed. She came closer, slow, cautious, but curious. "You came back," she said. Not a question, a statement. "I did," I answered, kneeling to her height. "Why?" I didn't know how to answer that. Because your father didn't send me away? Because I'm not brave enough to leave? Because I'm falling into something I don't understand? Because I wanted to see you again, I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She tilted her head. Papa said I should pay attention to how people look at me. Her voice dropped, serious now. He said that's how you know who's lying. My breath caught. And what do you see when you look at me, Sophia? She leaned in, close enough that her tiny fingers could touch the edge of my sleeve. You don't look like a lie, but you don't look like a promise either. Before I could speak, a shadow moved behind me. I felt it before I heard it. Vittorio. He stood at the edge of the path, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. The sunlight cut across his face in hard lines, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He didn't speak, just watched. Me. Her. Us. I rose slowly, brushing my hands against my skirt, trying to ground myself. She has a sharp eye, I said softly. She always has, he replied, his voice calm, but heavy with warning. I looked at him then, not through the lens of fear or strategy, but as a man. And I saw the fracture behind the armor, the ghost of something that had bled and never quite healed. And it wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about loss. It was about what came after. about what had to be rebuilt, bone by bone, with no guarantee of peace. Neither of us said what we were really thinking. We just stood there, in silence, in tension, in something that felt like the beginning of a storm.
She was still there when I came closer, her body angled slightly toward my daughter, as if shielding her from something unseen. There was no fear in her, just instinct. The way her hand had lingered near Sophia's shoulder, casual but ready, made something shift in my chest, something I didn't ask to feel. The men I trusted most stood behind me, silent, watching too. But it wasn't them I was thinking about. It was the way Arya's presence disrupted the quiet order of my world. She didn't belong here, but she fit, like an unwelcome truth that refused to be silenced. I told myself she was just another piece of the game, another mask sent by her family to appease my council, to tame the Dom with soft smiles and softer bodies. But Arya didn't try to charm. She didn't beg to be seen. She just existed, with purpose, with fire, with a quiet defiance that burned through the cold. And Sophia liked her. That mattered more than I wanted it to. Later, I stood with Arya in the back of the car as we drove toward the edge of the city. Tonight's meeting wasn't optional. I wanted her there, not for decoration, for observation, for the pressure. I needed to see how she handled real power, real danger, not candlelit dinners or curated smiles, but the kind of rooms where peace was a fragile thread and any wrong word could snap it. She didn't ask where we were going. She didn't fidget. She just stared out the window, her reflection more composed than I expected. When we arrived at the club, she stepped out before I could offer a hand. Good. I didn't want to touch her. Not yet. Not with eyes on us. Not with this heat already crawling beneath my skin. The room was low-lit and heavy with tension. Men rose when I entered. I acknowledged none of them at first. My presence was its own language. Arya followed behind me like a shadow stitched to fire. I felt her tension, but she hid it well. No perfume, no false sweetness, just clean skin, soft breath, and silence sharpened like a blade. We took our seats at the table. My closest allies flanked me. Arya sat to my right, not quite beside me, not quite apart. The man across from me, Fabrizio, slick and dangerous, let his eyes linger too long on her. I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. He looked away first. The meeting began. Money, territory, movement, betrayals not spoken, but tasted in the air. And through it all, Arya said nothing. She listened. She watched. When the waiter brought drinks, she didn't touch hers. Smart. When Fabrizio made a joke laced with threat, she didn't laugh. Smarter. Then the test came. A veiled comment about loyalty, about my new companion. I felt the shift before the words even landed. Everyone did. All eyes moved to her. Arya didn't flinch. I wasn't aware women were excluded from loyalty, she said softly, each syllable measured, every breath deliberate. Or is it just inconvenient when they display it better than men? Silence. Then a low chuckle. Not mocking. Impressed. I didn't smile, but I felt it. The heat of pride I hadn't wanted. She'd handled it. She'd risen. She'd owned the moment without needing my shield. As we left the club, I walked beside her, close enough to feel the static between us. I didn't speak. Neither did she. But the air around us was thick, charged, ready to ignite. When the car door opened, she paused before getting in. "What happens now?" she asked, voice low, not timid. I looked at her. Really looked. "Now," I said, "we see who you really are." She nodded once, then slipped inside. And I knew deep in my blood that this wouldn't end the way they planned. Not for her. Not for me.
The club's darkness still clung to my skin like smoke as I sat alone in the guest wing, silence wrapping around me with the weight of things unsaid. I hadn't changed out of the black dress yet. I didn't want to. It still held the heat of his gaze, the invisible imprint of his presence beside me. I told myself I hadn't worn it for him, that I chose it for power, simplicity, safety. But the truth was louder in the quiet. I'd wondered how it would look under those lights, with his eyes on me. And now I knew. I didn't flinch under their weight. I craved it. The tension between us had teeth. It didn't beg. It bit. And every time I spoke, I felt the air between us tighten, bend, threaten to snap. I didn't know if I was being tested or taunted. Maybe both. But I couldn't deny what stirred in me every time he stood close. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't fear. It was something darker, more primal, and it settled beneath my ribs like a secret I couldn't afford to confess. The room held too much quiet, so I slipped through the hallway, barefoot, fingers trailing along the cold marble as if the walls might whisper answers. The house was a cathedral of silence and shadow, and yet it pulsed with life beneath the surface, as if every room remembered more than it revealed. When I passed the study, I paused. The door was cracked open. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting gold across the leather armchair where he sat, half in shadow. Vittorio. One leg crossed, one hand resting on the armrest, a glass in his other hand catching the firelight. He didn't look up, but I felt him feel me, that unspoken awareness that always flared when we were near each other, as if the air itself alerted him to my presence. I should have walked away, should have turned back, but my feet moved forward, quiet, bold. I stepped into the room like I belonged there. He didn't speak, neither did I. I moved toward the shelves, fingers grazing the spines of books I didn't read. He watched me now. I felt the weight of his gaze slide over me like a slow burn. It wasn't polite. It wasn't careful. It was possessive, curious, dangerous, and I didn't stop it. I turned to him only when I reached the edge of the firelight, letting it kiss my bare shoulders, warm my throat. Did I pass your test? His lips curved, not quite a smile. It wasn't a test. Then what was it? A mirror. I swallowed hard. And what did you see? He stood slowly, like a storm-gathering shape, walked toward me with the kind of silence that demanded reverence. When he stopped in front of me, we were too close, not touching, not breathing freely, just suspended. I saw a woman who doesn't belong to anyone, he said, voice low, magnetic, but stands as if she does. I met his gaze and held it. And is that a problem? His eyes flicked to my mouth. Only if I start to believe you belong to me. The words struck like lightning, silent, electrifying. My pulse pounded against my skin, loud enough to hear. My breath caught in the space between us, neither inhaled nor released. I didn't step back. He didn't step closer. We existed in the tension, in the maybe, in the heat that could no longer be denied. And then, softly, deliberately, he turned and walked away. Not rejection, not retreat, just control. I stood alone, breathless in the firelight, knowing that whatever game we were playing had just crossed a line, and neither of us would ever be the same.
She stayed in the room longer than I expected, didn't chase the silence out, didn't retreat into fear. She let the fire cast its shadows across her skin and stood there, bare shoulders glowing like temptation, wrapped in defiance. I walked away first, not because I was finished, but because I wasn't. There's a line I haven't crossed in years, a line I swore I'd never touch again, and she's standing on the edge of it like she belongs there, like she was made to tempt me back into fire. In my office, the walls felt smaller, tighter. Her scent clung to the air, something clean, soft, unsweetened. Not perfume, skin, presence. The memory of her voice echoed in my mind, not the words, just the rhythm, how she stood her ground, how she let me look. Not just allowed it, invited it. And she knew, she knows, that's what makes her dangerous. The council thinks I'm stalling. They whisper like vultures circling flesh. 10 women sent to me, 10 doors closed. Aria wasn't even supposed to be one of them, but she walked into my life without permission, and I haven't told her to leave. That silence speaks louder than I intended. Ruggiero is pressing harder now, threats tucked behind diplomacy, promises wrapped in knives. He thinks because I lost a wife, I'm weak. Because I have a daughter, I'm exposed. He's wrong on both counts. I can survive anything, except softness. The knock came precisely at the wrong time. My second-in-command entered, face grim. There had been a breach, not in territory but in information. A list of our holdings had circulated through the wrong channels, brief, coded, but accurate enough to be dangerous. I gave instructions, sharp and immediate, and dismissed him. Then I stood still in the center of the room, feeling the shift under my feet. Trouble was coming. Again. When I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not the woman I buried, the one still upstairs. Her mouth, her silence, her restraint. There was too much control in the way she moved, too much awareness in the stillness she wore like a second skin. She wasn't pretending. She was protecting herself. But from what? And why did that make me want to break through it? Later, I found myself outside Sophia's room. Her nightlight glowed faintly beneath the door. I listened for breath, soft and even, safe, untouched by all the noise we built around her. She had Aria's ribbon in her hand, curled around her fingers like a secret. I didn't take it, I didn't move it, just watched her sleep for 1 full minute and walked away. In the hallway I stopped. She was there again, leaning against the wall just around the corner, like she hadn't meant to be caught. But she didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at me like she could read the pieces I kept hidden from the world. And maybe she could. I heard voices, she murmured. Nothing that concerns you, I replied. That's rarely true in houses like this. I stepped closer until we were only shadows apart. Careful, I warned. Curiosity cuts deeper here. So does silence, she said, eyes locked on mine. The pull was unbearable, not physical, molecular, as if her presence was recalibrating the air I thought I'd mastered, and I hated that she could do this to me with nothing but stillness. I didn't touch her, but I wanted to. Not gently, not tenderly, but like a man who forgot how to be careful. Instead, I said nothing. And when she stepped aside, allowing me to pass, I felt it again, that ache in my spine, that drag in my blood. She wasn't afraid of the dark in me, and that was the most dangerous thing of all.
The night hadn't let me go. Even in the quiet hours, it gripped my spine and whispered things I wasn't ready to name. I hadn't meant to linger outside Sophia's room. I hadn't meant to wait in the dark, hoping to catch the echo of Vittorio's footsteps like some secret I wasn't supposed to hear. But I stayed. I watched him. And for a moment, just a breath of time, I saw him not as the Dom, not as the man whose name could end wars with a nod, but as a father. As a man standing in the soft light of his daughter's innocence, completely, devastatingly human. That was the most dangerous version of him, and maybe that's why I couldn't sleep. I slipped outside before the sun rose, just far enough to feel the wind against my skin and breathe air that didn't carry his scent. The estate walls loomed behind me, the city barely waking in the distance. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to silence the storm inside me. I didn't belong here. Not really. I was a placeholder, a lie wearing my sister's fate, and yet somehow, I'd become a part of this story. Not because they let me in, because I didn't ask permission. That's when I heard my name, low, familiar, from another life. Arya. I turned before I had time to pretend I didn't recognize it. Marco. He stepped from the shadows, as if the universe had decided I hadn't had enough chaos yet. His eyes held too much of the past, too much of the boy who once promised he'd wait. He looked older, sharper, wrapped in tension that didn't suit him, but his voice still knew where I was weakest. What are you doing here? I asked, breath shallow. I should ask you the same. You followed me? I looked for you, he corrected, stepping closer. Everywhere. And then I saw the news, the whispers, a marriage, your name, his. I exhaled, slow. You shouldn't be here. No, he said, eyes dark. You shouldn't be here. With him, wearing her name, sleeping in his house. I'm not sleeping with him. He blinked, but only once. Not yet. His words struck something raw. That's not your business. You were supposed to be mine. His voice cracked. Just a breath, but enough. You think I forgot what we had? You think I waited this long to watch you become his? You don't understand. Then help me, he said, stepping closer, too close, his hand grazing my arm. Tell me you're being forced. Tell me you're doing this to protect your family. Tell me something I can fight. I wanted to. God, I wanted to give him something soft, but I was made of harder things now. His hand moved to my face, gentle, familiar, unwelcome. Marco, don't. But he didn't listen. His lips crashed into mine. Too fast, too hard, too full of memory I no longer wanted. I pushed against his chest, shocked, breath caught somewhere between no and never. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Vittorio's voice didn't come first. His hands did. Marco was ripped away from me like a weed from soil. Vittorio slammed him into the stone wall with a growl that wasn't human. His fist met flesh with a sound that echoed through the courtyard like thunder at midnight. I moved to stop it, to speak, to explain. But Vittorio didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His rage wasn't a question. It was a sentence. When Marco collapsed, dazed and bloodied, Vittorio turned to me, not gently. He crossed the space between us, lifted me like I weighed nothing, and threw me over his shoulder without a word. I gasped, more from shock than pain, fists beating lightly against his back, but he didn't flinch, didn't stop, carried me inside as if he were claiming property. The door slammed shut behind us, and I wasn't sure who I hated more, Marco for trying to remind me of who I'd been, or Vittorio for showing me exactly who I was becoming.
I didn't remember walking back through the doors, only the weight of her against me, the sound of her fists against my back, soft, defiant, almost confused. I hadn't meant to lose control, but when I saw him, his hands on her, his mouth against her skin like she was something he owned, I stopped thinking, stopped breathing. All I saw was red, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that lives in your blood long after it's spilled. He touched what wasn't his. He touched her. And I would have broken his jaw again if I hadn't needed to get her away. I dropped her inside the room, not carelessly, but not gently either. Her feet hit the floor, and she turned to face me like a storm gathering its fury. Her chest was rising fast. Her lips parted with anger or shock, I couldn't tell which. But I didn't speak. Not yet. I couldn't. My hands were still shaking, my breath still ragged with restraint. She was fire, and I was matchstick dry, too close to combustion. "What the hell was that?" she asked, voice low but cutting. I stepped forward, not to threaten, to close the distance. "You let him touch you." "I didn't let anything. He kissed me. I didn't ask for that." My jaw tightened. I knew that. I'd seen it. But it didn't matter. Not in that moment. Not with the image of him burned behind my eyes, his fingers on her skin, his mouth claiming what wasn't his to claim. My voice came out dark, cracked. "You should have screamed." I was trying to push him away, not start a war. I laughed once, low, bitter. "This is war, Arya. Everything in this house, in this life, every breath is a battlefield. You think silence saves people. It gets them killed." She moved toward me then, and for a moment I thought she'd slap me. But her hand didn't rise, her voice did. "And what do you think carrying me inside like a trophy accomplished? You think that proves you're in control?" "No," I said, voice dropping. "It proves you're mine." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of heat, of fury, of something neither of us dared name. She didn't step back, she didn't speak, and neither did I. The air between us pulsed, thick with things we couldn't undo. I saw the tremor in her hands, the fire behind her eyes. I saw her trying to hold the line we'd been dancing around for too long, but I was done dancing. "You want to leave?" I asked, softer now. She didn't answer. I stepped closer, so close I could taste her breath. "Say it." Still nothing. I reached up, slow, deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. My fingers grazed the line of her jaw, and she shivered. Not from fear, from something else. Something we both knew had been building since the first glance. The first lie, the first time she dared to speak back. Her voice came then, barely more than a whisper. "You don't get to choose what I want." "No," I said, "but I get to know when you're lying." Her eyes closed, just for a second, but it was enough. When she opened them again, they weren't angry, they were raw, and behind them, hunger. I didn't kiss her, I could have, I wanted to, but I didn't, because what I felt wasn't just desire, it was warning. If I touched her now, I wouldn't stop. And if I didn't stop, she'd never be free of me again, so I stepped back and left the room. Because in that moment, I wasn't afraid of losing control. I was afraid of what I'd do if I didn't.
I stood in the silence he left behind, heart racing, skin burning in places he hadn't even touched. The echo of his presence still lingered in the room, low, dangerous, unforgettable. He had come at me like a storm, torn through me like a warning, and yet walked away before the damage could take shape. But the ruin was already done, not outside, inside, where his voice had carved itself into the walls of my restraint, mine. That word hadn't left my body since he said it. It clung to me like a second skin, invasive, possessive, terrifying. And the worst part wasn't that I hated it. It was that some quiet, wicked part of me wanted it to be true. Sleep never came. I dressed without thinking, hands moving on instinct as dawn tried to find its way through the drapes. A call had come from Ruggiero's people. Something about a gala, a public appearance, a signal to the council that the arrangement was progressing. I didn't ask questions. I knew better. In this world, obedience was safer than curiosity. But safety had become irrelevant the moment Vittorio carried me inside, like he didn't care who was watching. The estate's tailor had left a dress, black, sharp, the kind that made softness feel like a weapon. I wore it because I needed armor. I painted my lips, pinned my hair, and let my reflection become someone untouchable. Someone who hadn't nearly let herself fall to her knees at the sound of his breath. The gala was a blur of lights and lies, men in suits, women in diamonds, a world built on performance and silence. Vittorio stood beside me like a god made of shadow and law, his hand never touching mine, but his presence tethering me tighter than chains. Every time someone looked at me, they saw him. Every time someone looked at him, they wondered about me, and we gave them nothing. Not smiles, not whispers, just tension, thick, palpable, and hungry. I escaped to the terrace the moment I could. The air was cold, bracing. I leaned against the stone railing, trying to breathe something that wasn't him, but I couldn't shake it, the way his eyes had followed me all night. Not possessive, not protective, predatory, like he was waiting for something to snap. "Arya," the voice came behind me, low and sharp. "Marco." I turned, heart tightening. He looked cleaner this time, no bruises visible, but the storm in his gaze had only grown darker. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered. "Neither should you." He stepped closer, his anger coiled beneath the surface. "You think I'm going to just vanish because he hit me?" he asked. "Because he dragged you away like a fucking trophy? That's not love, Arya." "I never said it was," I said too quietly. "Then leave with me. Tonight. Right now." "No." His jaw clenched. "Why not?" "Because I don't belong to you." He flinched, but only for a second. "You don't belong to him either." And then something in his expression shifted. Something colder. He stepped closer, and I backed away. "I waited for you," he said. "Years. Letters. Messages. Silence. I let you go because I thought it was your choice. But this is you disappearing inside someone else's cage." "I'm not in a cage." "Then prove it." He reached for me, his fingers grazing my wrist. I pulled back. He didn't listen. His hand gripped tighter, not violent, but enough. And then, behind him, I saw the shadow, felt it. Before Marco even turned, Vittorio's voice cut through the air like a blade. Low, final. "Let her go." Marco froze. Vittorio stepped forward, slow, lethal. And suddenly the gala behind us didn't exist. There was only this moment, this collision, this promise of violence. Marco released my wrist, slowly. Vittorio's eyes never left him, but when he spoke again, his words weren't for Marco. They were for me. Inside, now. I didn't argue. Because the only thing more dangerous than a man like Vittorio watching you is when he's the one who stops.
I saw the way he touched her. Not violent, not cruel, but entitled, like her skin still belonged to a memory he refused to bury. And Arya, she hadn't cried out, hadn't pulled away in fear. She'd looked at him with fire, not fear. That should have calmed me. It didn't. It ignited something colder, deeper, because watching another man think he could reach for what's mine was a betrayal I hadn't earned, but still felt like blood in my mouth. I didn't strike him, not this time. I didn't need to, because the moment she saw me, she moved, not away from me, toward. No protest, no hesitation, just silent obedience, sharp and heavy, like a vow only we could hear. And that was worse. That was more damning, because now I knew she felt it too. Inside, the house swallowed us whole. Doors closed, walls breathed. She didn't speak. Neither did I. We moved like opposite ends of a magnet, circling, repelling, drawing closer with every second. I could feel her heartbeat in the air between us, as if the very space had become an extension of her. I wanted to shake the sound of his name off her skin. I wanted to erase his touch with mine. But if I started, I wouldn't stop, and I couldn't afford to lose control. Not with her, not yet. She turned then, eyes dark, mouth parted as if on the edge of words she couldn't say. I stopped walking. We stood in the hallway, 2 breaths apart, and the world tilted just enough to unmoor us both. "I didn't ask for this," she said, voice low but steel-edged. "I know, but you acted like I did, because I won't let you become collateral." "And what am I now?" she asked, chin lifted. "A symbol? A pawn? Or just your next possession?" That word, possession, cut deeper than it should have, not because it was wrong, but because it was too close to the truth. I stepped into her space, slow, deliberate, like every movement was permission and warning combined. "You think this is about ownership?" I asked. "You think I'm trying to chain you?" Her breath hitched. "No," I whispered. "I'm trying to survive you." That silenced her, for a heartbeat, 2. Then she said the one thing I hadn't expected. "Then stop pretending this is a game." Something cracked between us. She reached past anger now, into something rawer, riskier, and I couldn't help myself. My hand moved to her jaw, fingers brushing skin that had haunted my sleep for nights. Her breath shivered under my touch. Her eyes didn't close, they never looked away. "You want this to mean something?" I asked, quiet and lethal. "Then know this. If we cross that line, I won't let you go. Not tomorrow, not ever." She didn't pull back, and that was her answer. I let my hand fall before I did what we'd both regret, and in that space where lust and loyalty tangled, I made my decision. This wouldn't be a performance. This wouldn't be politics. If I was going to take her, it would be real.
I left him standing in the hallway, fire smoldering beneath his silence, and I didn't look back. Not because I was done, but because I wasn't. Because every second in his presence made it harder to breathe and easier to burn. The walls of this house knew our tension now. They held it like a pulse, echoing with every near touch, every unsaid word, every glance that lingered too long. I needed air, Not space, not freedom, just a breath that didn't taste like him. I found it in the garden, or at least I tried. The moon was half asleep above the hedges, casting just enough light to soften the sharpness of everything. I leaned against the stone fountain, letting the chill seep into my skin, hoping it would numb the heat still coiling in my chest. It didn't. It never did. And then I heard him. Not Vittorio. Marco. He came from the shadows like a ghost from a memory I hadn't summoned, his eyes wild with something I didn't want to name. I straightened. Too slow. His presence wasn't loud, but it pressed against mine, intrusive, invasive. I shouldn't have come, he said. Then don't stay. His smile was broken. You used to be softer. I used to be safe. He stepped closer, and I felt my muscles coil in warning. He noticed. I loved you, he said. I know. I still do. Don't. His voice dropped. Why not? Because he told you you're his? My breath caught, sharp and stupid. This isn't about him. No, it's about you. His hand reached out, hovered near my face, fingers trembling. You let him change you. I stepped back. He followed. Marco, stop. But he didn't. He closed the space between us with desperation in his eyes and regret wrapped in his mouth, and then his lips were on mine. Fast, unwanted, full of something that felt like theft. I pushed against his chest, hard. My voice rose. No. And then he was gone, ripped away. I gasped, stumbling as Vittorio's silhouette filled the garden like judgment itself. Marco's body hit the ground hard, and Vittorio didn't hesitate. He struck once, twice, controlled, brutal. His fury wasn't loud. It was surgical, precise, and it didn't ask for permission. Touch her again, he said, voice like a promise soaked in venom, and I'll bury you with the last man who made that mistake. Marco scrambled up, blood at his lip, pride shattered. He didn't fight back. He just ran. Silence returned too fast. I stood frozen. Vittorio turned to me slowly, and for a moment, I saw the storm in his eyes still breaking against the shore of restraint. He didn't speak. He didn't demand answers. He simply reached for me, arms hard, hands sure, and before I could protest, he lifted me off the ground, over his shoulder, like a claim. I gasped, hands pushing at his back, but he didn't slow, didn't explain. He carried me through the house like fire in his grip, and the only thing louder than the sound of his steps was my pulse. He didn't throw me. He didn't kiss me. He set me down in his room, closed the door behind us, and let the silence stretch until it wrapped around us like silk and steel. I warned him, he said, quiet. I nodded, words caught in my throat. His voice dropped even lower. I won't warn again. And then, softer, more dangerous than rage could ever be. I meant it when I said you're mine. I didn't move, because somewhere deep inside, I didn't want to.
She stood in my room like a question I hadn't dared to answer, breathing the same charged air I had polluted with possessiveness and restraint. Her skin was flushed, not from fear, not anymore, but from the ghost of my hands and the echo of what I'd just done. I didn't look away. I couldn't, because every second her eyes stayed locked on mine felt like a confession, one neither of us had spoken aloud, but both understood too well. This wasn't about protection anymore. This wasn't about duty. This was something darker, hungrier, and it was unraveling me from the inside out. I should have stepped back. I didn't. My body had already betrayed me by moving closer, not touching, not yet, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off her like it was mine to take. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She stood her ground, chin high, mouth parted like she was on the edge of something sharp and irreversible. Her defiance had always drawn me. But this quiet surrender laced in fire, it undid me. You didn't stop me, I said. Her pulse flickered at her throat. You didn't ask. My breath left me slow, rough. I don't want to ask, I murmured, stepping even closer. I want to take. The air thickened, stilled, pulsed. Then why haven't you? Because if I started, I wouldn't stop. Because touching her would be like starting a war I had no intention of ending. Because every inch of her was permission and warning all at once. Because I couldn't protect her and possess her at the same time, but I was about to try. My hand reached up, fingers ghosting along the curve of her jaw, light enough to barely register, heavy enough to make her eyes flutter closed. She leaned into the contact, just slightly, just enough. I felt the shiver beneath her skin like a promise being made in silence. My thumb brushed her bottom lip, her breath hitched, and in that moment, every rule I'd built between us collapsed. But I still didn't kiss her, because the kiss wasn't what I wanted. I wanted her unraveling, I wanted her gasping, I wanted her ruined for every man who'd ever dared to think she could be ordinary. "You shouldn't want this," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "I do." That was it. 2 words. And the last thread snapped. I backed her into the wall, slow, deliberate, like a predator giving prey the chance to run and watching her choose to stay. My hand slid to her waist, gripping just tight enough to remind her who I was. Not her savior, not her lover, something more dangerous than both. Her head tilted back, eyes blazing. What now? I pressed my forehead to hers, our mouths a breath apart, the tension crackling like live wire between us. Now I decide how far I let myself fall. She didn't blink. "You already have." The admission shattered something in me, but instead of pulling her closer, I let my hand fall, stepped back. Not because the moment had passed, but because it hadn't. Because if I touched her again, it would be the end of every wall I'd built, the end of logic, of patience, of pretending this wasn't inevitable. She stared at me, stunned, breathing hard. "You're not ready," I said. "For what?" "For what I become when I finally take you." She didn't deny it, didn't look away. And that, more than her lips, more than her body, more than her breath catching my name in the dark, that was what wrecked me. Because now I wanted all of her, and I knew eventually I'd have it.
He didn't touch me again, but the absence of it was louder than the heat of his skin. I felt it echoing inside me long after he'd left the room, like my body was still standing beneath his hands, still bracing for the moment that never came. Every breath I took after that was threaded with ache. Not disappointment, not exactly, just tension, coiled and sharp and far too alive to ignore. He'd looked at me like I was already his, and then walked away like I was the one who couldn't handle it. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was more afraid of being taken than I was of being left. But fear didn't matter anymore. Not here. Not between us. I didn't sleep. Again. I watched the light shift across the ceiling until morning pushed through the windows like a dare. When I rose, the house felt quieter, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I dressed slower this time, not because I didn't know what the day would bring, but because I did. The air had changed. Something was coming. And whatever it was, I would no longer face it pretending to be someone else's shadow. The knock came before I left the room. A guard. Formal. Cold. "The boss wants you in the study." I didn't ask why. I followed. When I entered, Vittorio was already there, standing by the window, sleeves rolled, hands behind his back like he was trying to hold something in. He didn't turn when I walked in, but he knew I was there. He always did. "I need you to listen," he said, voice low. I stayed silent. "There's pressure. From the council. From your father. They want more than an agreement now. They want a date." My breath caught. "For the wedding," he added, turning to face me. I didn't flinch. Not this time. "And what do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, even as my heart picked up pace. His jaw tensed. "What I want doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." He stepped forward, slow, eyes unreadable. "I want them off your back," he said. "I want Sophia untouched by this. I want time to figure out what the hell I'm doing before I wake up with a wife I can't protect." I crossed my arms. "Then tell them the truth. That you're not your sister? That I'm not anyone's pawn." He exhaled hard, frustrated. "They don't care who you are. They care what your name does next to mine. Then make it mean something." His eyes locked onto mine, still, sharp. "That's what I'm trying to do." I moved toward him, slow, not out of caution but choice. I wanted to close the distance on my terms this time. When I stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the tension ripple off his skin, I lifted my chin. "Then let me speak to them." "No." "Why?" "Because they'll twist it. You'll lose control." "I'd rather lose control in front of them than keep pretending in front of you." His silence cracked something inside me. I didn't mean to reach for him, but I did. My fingers brushed his arm, light, careful, just enough to remind him I wasn't breaking. I was stepping forward. And when he didn't move away, I leaned closer, my voice a breath. "If this is real," I said, "if any of this means more than survival, then stop protecting me like I'm made of glass." He looked at me for a long time, too long, as if he was trying to decide if he'd already lost. Then he spoke, quiet and raw. "You don't know what you're asking." I did, and I didn't care. Because this wasn't a game anymore. It was a choice, and I was making mine.
She stood there, daring me to let her bleed beside me. Not behind, not beneath, but beside. And something inside me shifted. Not snapped, not broke. Shifted, like stone cracking under the weight of something too heavy to deny. Her voice still echoed in the room, soft but sharp. All edges and honesty. She wasn't afraid to belong to me, but she refused to disappear into me. That was what made her dangerous. That was what made her real. After she left, I stayed in the study long enough to let the silence settle. Then I locked the door and pulled the file from the drawer I'd avoided for months. The one I shouldn't have opened. The one with my dead wife's name printed at the top like a scar. I flipped past the official reports, past the photos, past the statements filled with shadows and lies, until I reached the one detail I hadn't let myself touch. The name buried in the margins. A signature. Ruggiero. Not the order. Not the gun. Not the blood on the marble floor. But something smaller. A transaction. A transfer. A deal made 2 days before the attack that killed her. Something quiet, buried, and deliberate. It didn't prove anything. Not yet. But it stank of betrayal. My hands tightened around the edge of the desk. I should have expected it. Ruggiero never moved without gain. Selling one daughter for power hadn't been a surprise. But watching him now try to tighten the noose around Arya's neck, that was personal. And now I had to wonder how long he'd been playing this game, how far back it went, and what it would cost to end it. I made a call. Quiet. Quick. Instructions passed in low tones to men who didn't need reasons, only names. Then I went to find her. She was in the garden again, but this time she wasn't trying to escape. She was sitting still, face tilted to the sun like she was listening to something no one else could hear. I watched her from the archway for too long, watched the way the wind played with her hair, watched the way she closed her eyes like the world could be quiet if she just asked nicely. I didn't want to break that peace, but I was going to. When she heard me, she didn't flinch. She just opened her eyes and said, "What did you decide?" I sat beside her closer than I should have, not touching but near enough to feel the space pull taut between us. "They want a public announcement," I said. "An engagement party. Press, guests, proof." She nodded once. "And what do we give them?" "A lie that feels like the truth." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Isn't that what we've been doing all along?" "No," I said. "This time, I want it to be your lie too." She looked at me then, really looked, and I knew she understood what I wasn't saying. She'd stand beside me, she'd wear the ring, but this time, she'd do it on her own terms, and I'd let her. I pulled a box from my coat pocket and opened it. Not flashy, not loud, just a ring, sleek, sharp, clean. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she whispered, "Are we really doing this? We're already in it." Her fingers brushed the velvet, then stopped. "If I say yes," she said, "you don't get to shut me out when it gets dark." "I won't. And if you fall, I'll fall toward you." She took the ring, not because she was mine, but because I'd finally admitted I was hers.
The ring sat on my finger like a secret I hadn't decided to keep. It was beautiful, subtle, deliberate, undeniably his. Not a mark of ownership, not exactly, but a warning, a promise, a line drawn in every direction that said I was no longer untouchable. I wasn't hidden now. I wasn't temporary. I was visible, and the world would feel it. The announcement came fast, no delay, no space to hesitate. Invitations were sent, names whispered, threats measured beneath gold-lettered scripts. I watched it unfold around me like a stage being set for a play I hadn't written but was expected to perform. Vittorio didn't ask for rehearsals. He handed me the script, and I tore it in half. We would play this our way or not at all. The dress was black again. It always would be. Not because I mourned, but because it made me feel more dangerous than beautiful. And I needed that tonight. Power wrapped in silk, sharpness in shadow. I wore my hair pinned high, my gaze unflinching. I stepped into the light beside him, and together we turned every stare into silence. But it was Sophia who reminded me why I was still here. She ran to me just before we left the house, shoes clicking, hair a wild mess of ribbons and rebellion. She held a crumpled flower, probably stolen from the garden, and offered it like it was made of stars. "For luck," she said. I knelt, took it carefully, kissed the top of her head. "For us?" She nodded. "For you, so no one looks at you mean." Vittorio watched from the doorway. He said nothing, but his eyes did, and they didn't stop watching, even when the car pulled away. The venue shimmered with cold glamour, crystal, velvet, shadows dressed in wealth and menace. Faces I didn't recognize smiled with teeth too white. Glasses clinked, murmurs curled through the air like smoke. I stayed close to Vittorio, not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to see it, the way we moved in sync without touching, the way he glanced at me before speaking. the way my hand hovered near his without resting there. It wasn't performance, it was tension, measured, controlled, desperate in silence. At the center of the room stood a pedestal dressed in light, and I was pushed toward it by more than expectation. I climbed the stairs. I turned. I faced them. And somewhere deep inside, I stopped trembling. They listened. They stared. They waited for submission. Instead, I gave them clarity. "I am not Valentina," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "I wasn't sent here by choice, but I stayed, because power doesn't scare me. Silence does, and I will not be quiet for your comfort." The room froze. Vittorio didn't stop me. He stepped forward instead, slipped his hand into mine, and said only 4 words. "She speaks for us." It was done. But the moment I stepped away, I felt it. Not fear. A shift. The kind you feel in your spine before lightning strikes. A server brushed past me. Too fast, too quiet. In his hand, something folded. I took it. Opened it. Read the words once. Twice. Let the ink burn through my skin. "Come home or Valentina dies." The blood in my body turned to ice, but my face didn't break. I folded the note, slipped it into my palm, and smiled. Because now it wasn't about pretending anymore. It was about surviving. And they'd just made a mistake. They threatened the wrong sister.
I knew something had shifted the moment her smile froze too perfectly. Aria was many things. Reckless, proud, quietly dangerous, but she wasn't fake. Not with me. Not with anyone. When she smiled for the room, it usually bled truth, but this time, it held something else, something sharp beneath the gloss. Her eyes found mine across the sea of tailored suits and hollow laughter, and in that single look, I saw it, the break, the burn, the message buried in her palm. I didn't approach her, not yet. I watched. I waited. I let the rest of the evening play out as if the world wasn't already catching fire beneath us. Back at the estate, she said nothing in the car. Neither did I. Silence, again, our most honest language. The moment we were alone, she opened her hand. The paper was creased, smudged, still warm from her skin. I read it once. Then I read it again, and the restraint I'd been gripping so tightly around her shattered like glass between my fingers. They had no idea what they'd just done. "I'm going to kill him," I said. Not loud, not theatrical, just a fact shaped like fury. Aria stepped closer, placing a hand on my chest, not to calm me, she knew better, but to anchor herself. "They're bluffing," she said, but even she didn't believe it. "They don't know where she is. They don't need to know. They just need leverage, or the illusion of it." My voice was barely above a whisper now, but the rage under it coiled like smoke ready to ignite. I could already see the setup forming. Ruggiero had gotten too comfortable, too bold, and someone else had fed that delusion. This wasn't just about keeping me in line anymore. It was about breaking me. I turned away, pulled out my phone, issued 3 orders in rapid sequence. Secure the estate. Double the detail around Sophia. Activate the search grid on Valentina. Aria watched me move like a man preparing for war, and I was. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She stood there solid, burning quietly from the inside out. "She's my sister," she finally said, "and that makes her mine too now." Her breath caught, and I almost hated how easily those words came out of me. But they were true. All of it was. The moment Aria became mine, her blood did too. Her wounds, her war, her past. And I would bury anyone who thought they could exploit it. I stepped toward her, cupped her jaw in my hand, thumb brushing the edge of her cheekbone like I was trying to memorize something I might have to protect with violence. "I won't let them hurt her," I said. "Not while you wear my ring." I'd still want that, even if I didn't. That nearly broke me, because I believed her, and that was more dangerous than anything else. I leaned in, lips hovering near her ear, then helped me find the traitor inside my walls. Her breath trembled against my throat. "Yes," she whispered. Not a question, a vow. And in that moment, with the note crushed between our palms and war beating like a second heartbeat in the walls around us, I knew the truth I hadn't said aloud. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about power anymore. It was about the one thing I hadn't wanted to need again, something sharp, something fragile, something that looked too much like love.
I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Not with that note burned into my mind. Not with the echo of Vittorio's voice still coiled around my spine like a vow made in fire. We were past pretending now, past the safe distance that kept us from slipping into something neither of us could name without consequence. The war had found us, and instead of running, we stood together, back to back, flame to flame. I didn't ask for that kind of loyalty, but he gave it, and I knew what that meant. It meant he would burn everything to keep me breathing. It meant I had to do the same. By morning, the air inside the estate had changed. Tighter. Watchful. Men moved like shadows with orders tucked beneath their silence. Sophia was kept close, never out of sight. Her laughter a little quieter, her steps more guarded. But she didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She held my hand tighter when we walked the halls, and I wondered if she understood more than we thought. Vittorio was colder with everyone else, but not with me, not anymore. He looked at me differently now, not like a woman placed at his side, but like a weapon carved to match his hands. I felt it every time he glanced my way, every time our skin almost touched. And when we finally sat across from each other, the council demanding clarity and answers and a date, it wasn't just him they looked at. It was me, and I didn't lower my gaze. They asked if I was ready. I said yes, not because I had to, because I meant it. Later, after the tension cracked and scattered across the marble like glass, I found him on the balcony, watching the city like it was a game of chess he already knew how to win. But I knew the truth. He wasn't watching the board. He was watching the fire beneath it. "She's alive," I said softly, stepping into the cold. "I can feel it." His eyes met mine. "We'll bring her home. And then? Then we bury whoever touched her." The way he said it didn't scare me. It made me trust him more. I reached for his hand. He let me take it. His fingers curled around mine like armor closing over something delicate. And I leaned in, pressing my lips to his shoulder, not to calm him, not to distract, but to remind him he wasn't alone. That if he was going to destroy something for me, I'd be ready to destroy it with him. That night, I stayed with Sophia while he met with men whose names I would never remember. She asked me to braid her hair and told me she wanted a new dress for the wedding, one with stars on it. She said she wanted to walk between us and hold both our hands, and when she smiled like that, everything in me went still. Because I wasn't faking, because I didn't want to. After she fell asleep, I stayed beside her bed, tracing her breath with my own, listening to the sounds of the house like they might offer me a map. But the map was already in. I could feel the path now, where this was going, what it would cost, who I'd have to become to survive it. And I was ready. For Valentina. For Vittorio. For the fire coming toward us.
The betrayal didn't surprise me. It never does. It's the ones closest to you, the ones who bow a little too easily, whose eyes stay down a little too long, who move just slow enough to stay invisible. I've learned to read those silences, to catalogue every pause, every sidelong glance, every lie shaped like loyalty. And now I had names, confirmed, quietly, precisely. Men I'd broken bread with. Men I'd let close enough to see the bones beneath the empire. Men who had whispered my death behind locked doors while smiling in my face. But I was still breathing. They made one mistake. They let Aria live. I stood over the map in my office, lit by nothing but a single lamp and the tension crawling beneath my skin. Roots, patterns, weaknesses, every detail locked into place like the final movement in a symphony of war. Aria's voice still echoed in my mind from the night before, quiet, determined, full of something I hadn't heard since before the fire took everything from me. Belief. She believed we would win. She believed in me, and I would not let that faith rot in my hands. Marco was on the list. That much I'd already guessed. He hadn't just been desperate, he'd been primed, coached, fed just enough to think he still had a chance with her, and foolish enough to act on it. But he wasn't the center. Just another pawn. The core was deeper, older, and it led back to Ruggero. I wanted to kill him. Slowly, loudly. Let the world watch me dismantle the man who tried to sell his daughters like currency. But this wasn't about rage, not now. This was about control, precision. I would not give them chaos. I would give them a reckoning so cold it echoed for generations. The engagement party would be the stage. I would let them come. I would let them drink our wine, smile for the cameras, speak soft praises of union and peace. And when the moment came, when their guards were down and their masks off, I would cut the throat of every false alliance in the room. But first, Aria had to know. I found her in the library reading to Sophia, voice soft, curled in candlelight like something sacred. I watched them for a moment, letting the sight anchor me. It always did. She made this place feel like something other than a fortress, like it might be a home. When Sophia drifted to sleep, Aria rose without a sound and followed me down the hall without a word. We didn't speak until the door closed behind us, and the weight of the plan settled between us like a heartbeat. "We draw them in," I said. She nodded. "And then? We take their teeth out before they know they've bitten the wrong throat." She didn't smile, but her eyes burned. "Marco's still a threat," she said. "He's also a distraction. The real danger is your father." She looked away just for a second. "I'm not going to ask you to choose," I said, but she met my eyes again, unwavering. "You don't have to." And in that moment, I knew what she'd sacrificed to stand here with me. Not just freedom, not just safety, but the illusion that blood meant anything when weighed against betrayal. I stepped closer, not to kiss her, not to claim her, just to be near enough that she knew I understood. "After this," I said, voice low, "there's no going back." She reached for my hand, wove our fingers together, and whispered, "Good," because she didn't want back, she wanted through.
The dress was white this time, but it didn't feel like purity. It felt like surrender sharpened into strategy. Vittorio had chosen it, not because it was tradition, but because it was contrast. White against blood, white against fire, white against every dark thing that had led me here. And when I stepped out into the light beside him, with every eye watching, I didn't feel like a bride. I felt like bait, beautiful, composed, dangerous. The estate had been transformed, no longer cold, no longer stone. It breathed now, heavy with candlelight, wine, and expectation. Music floated, distant, too soft to cover the undercurrent of tension that pulsed through the floor. I walked with measured grace, hand on Vittorio's arm, lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Not joy, not fear, a warning. Sophia walked ahead of us, her dress twinkling with tiny sewn stars, just like she wanted. Every few steps she looked back, eyes checking for me. I nodded once and she kept going, small and perfect and untouched. For now. Inside the ballroom, nothing cracked. Not a laugh, not a glass, not a mask. The council watched us like statues carved in menace. Ruggiero stood near the back, flanked by allies with too many secrets and just enough ambition to make them fools. His gaze found mine and didn't flinch. He still thought he could control this, control me. I smiled wider. The speech was short. A toast, an announcement, a blessing dressed in manipulation. Vittorio's voice was steady, deliberate. He didn't speak of love. He spoke of alliance, of future, of peace born from order. And when he turned to me, when his hand lifted mine and the crowd watched him place the ring there again, it wasn't symbolic, it was war. But what none of them saw, what only I knew, was the tension in his jaw, the command in his breath, the calculation behind every word. The trap was closing, and I was the final thread. Then the lights dimmed, a soft cue, and all at once the first layer of loyalty cracked. A man stepped forward from the shadows near the musicians, another near the far window, one by the bar. Not guards, not staff, soldiers, ours. Everything moved slowly after that. Vittorio's hand didn't leave mine, even as guns were drawn, even as doors slammed shut, even as panic tried to rise in the room but was met with stillness. One man tried to reach for a weapon. He didn't make it past the first twitch of muscle. The sound of the gunshot echoed like a bell. Final. Clean. Screams rose, but no one ran. They couldn't. And I didn't move, because I was done running. I turned to the crowd, lifted my chin, and said only one thing. You were warned. And then Vittorio let go. Not of me, of the leash around the night, and everything burned.
There is a silence that comes after the storm. Not peace, not relief, just the absence of screaming, the kind that rings in your bones, that lingers in your breath, that tastes like metal and smoke. Bodies had been removed, blood cleaned, but the air still carried weight, memory, proof. I stood in the center of the ballroom, the place where betrayal had bloomed, where loyalty had shattered, where I had chosen fire over diplomacy, and not once did I feel regret. They thought I wouldn't do it. They thought I would hesitate. They forgot who I was before I became her future. Ruggiero had been spared only long enough to witness the fall of every man he aligned with. I watched him tremble, not from fear, from rage, from realization. He wasn't the executioner anymore. He was the offering. I could have ended him in that moment. Fast, cruel, final. But death was mercy, and mercy was no longer in my hands. It belonged to Aria. She stood behind me, eyes sharp, voice unreadable. She hadn't flinched when the first shot was fired. She hadn't begged when I ordered their names one by one. She hadn't blinked when her father was brought to his knees. I turned to her now, and waited, not as dom, not as judge, but as man. Yours, I said simply. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the hem of her white dress brushing across red-stained marble like poetry, laced in vengeance. Ruggiero looked up, recognition bleeding into dread, but Aria didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse. She didn't ask why. She knelt in front of him, not to plead, to meet him at eye level, and whispered, "You taught me never to beg." Then she stood and walked away. That was the end of him, not the bullet, the dismissal. I gave the order later, quiet, clean. When it was done, I found her in Sophia's room. The little girl was asleep, curled against Arya's side, one hand tangled in her hair. Arya was staring out the window, face lit by city lights, by the ashes of a night that had changed everything. She didn't turn when I entered, but I crossed the room, sat beside them, let the silence stretch between us until it turned into something softer. "We're alone now," I said. She nodded. "Does it feel like a victory?" She met my gaze finally, and what I saw there wasn't triumph. It was something deeper. "Not yet," she said, "but it feels like the beginning of one." I leaned in, kissed her temple, breathed in the scent of something that was no longer fear. She was mine now, not because I claimed her, because she chose to stay after the fire, and I knew this was the moment I'd feared the most, because I had everything I wanted and everything to lose.
There's a different kind of quiet now. Not the kind that follows violence, not the kind that hums with fear. This one is softer, warmer. A quiet that lives in the space between breaths, between his footsteps and mine, between the laughter that echoes down marble halls and the hush of a little girl's dreams. Peace, I think, isn't loud. It's not triumphant. It's not even permanent. It's fragile, earned. And for the first time in my life, it belongs to me. The morning light hits differently here. I watch it stretch across the floor, spill onto the sheets, wrap around the outline of his body where he sleeps beside me. Vittorio doesn't move when I slip out of bed. He senses me. I know he does. His fingers twitch. His jaw tenses. But he lets me go. He always does now. Not because he doesn't care, but because he trusts I'll come back. I cross the hall barefoot, the hem of my robe whispering over cold tile. Sophia's door is open. She's sitting up in bed, hair a tangled halo, eyes still heavy with dreams. She sees me and smiles, the kind that makes everything inside me still. I sit beside her, and she curls into my side without words, her warmth folding into mine like she was always meant to be here. "We don't have to go anywhere today," I whisper. "Good," she says. "Can we bake something?" "Anything you want." She hums in approval, and I kiss the top of her head. She smells like sleep and something sweet I can't name. I think about all the things I was never taught to want. Soft mornings, stolen peace, belonging, and then I think about everything I'd burn again just to keep this. Later, I find Vittorio in the garden, shirt sleeves rolled, coffee in hand, staring at nothing and everything. He doesn't look at me when I approach. He just holds out the mug I didn't ask for. I take it, sip once, stand beside him like I've always belonged in this silence. "She slept through the night," I say. He nods. "Good." "She wants to bake," he smirks. "She always wants to bake. I think she likes the mess more than the cake." His smile deepens. "She gets that from you." I glance at him, and for a second, it's just us. No ghosts, no war, no blood staining the edges of who we used to be. Just this man who once ruled by fear, and this woman who once lived by silence, standing side by side, tethered by something we no longer have to name. "You're different," I say. "So are you." "Is it real?" He finally looks at me, and in his eyes, I see the truth. "It is now." I nod, because I believe him, because I feel it. Not in the calm, but in the way he still watches the shadows, in the way I still check every locked door before bed, in the way we touch, like we know how much it costs to survive. We're not healed, but we're healing, and sometimes that's louder than all the rest. The world outside hasn't changed. There are still men who want what isn't theirs, still whispers behind walls, still scars beneath skin. But here, in this house, we turned into a home. In this life we stitched together from broken things, we've built something strong, something sacred. Later, when the house is quiet again, he'll pull me into his arms without speaking. He'll kiss me like it's a secret, like I'm the only thing left that still feels true. And I'll let him, because I am, and because he is, and because even if the peace doesn't last, we will. We always will.
Peace is a strange thing. You don't notice when it begins, only that one day the silence stops feeling like a threat. The footsteps behind you are smaller, lighter. Laughter replaces low voices, and the shadows, though still there, lose their fangs. You breathe slower, you sleep deeper, and you wake up with something more dangerous than fear, hope. I walk the halls now without a weapon. My men still watch the gates, still move in shifts, but I no longer live waiting for betrayal. The war ended, but I didn't win it alone. She stood beside me in the fire, and when the flames came down, she didn't run. She reached for my hand, kissed the ash from my mouth, and said, "This is ours now." And it is. She moves through this house like she's always belonged to it, yet nothing about her is tame. She commands without raising her voice. She sees everything. She feels everything. I used to think strength was found in the ones who don't break, but she taught me otherwise. It's in the ones who break and choose to build again. Sophia calls her mama now. She didn't ask permission, just said it one night at dinner, between a bite of pasta and a spilled glass of juice. Arya didn't cry, but she froze, just long enough for me to feel the crack in her chest open and flood the room with something I didn't have words for. After that, nothing was the same, nor should it be. This morning, I went to the cemetery alone. The grave was clean, untouched, just as I left it. Her name carved into stone, cold and final. I stood there for a while, letting the past sit heavy in my bones. I owed her that. I told her what she already knew, that I'd found something again, that I hadn't meant to, that it had started with war, but ended with a woman who refused to be afraid of me, who didn't shrink when I shattered, who didn't flinch when I loved her with something raw and unfinished. I left a single rose, then I walked away, because grief is not a leash, it is a scar. And some scars become maps. Back home I found them in the kitchen, flour everywhere, Sophia laughing, Arya barefoot, hair a mess, eyes shining like danger wrapped in sunlight. She looked up when she saw me, didn't speak, just smiled. It gutted me, and I smiled back. Later, when Sophia was tucked between pillows and dreams, I pulled Arya into my lap on the balcony. Her robe slipped off one shoulder, and I let my hand rest there, palm over bone, heat over heartbeat. "I went to see her," I murmured. Arya leaned her head against mine. Did she speak? Not in words. She didn't have to. We sat like that for a long time, not in silence, in stillness. Because peace, I've learned, isn't quiet. It's knowing the war is over, and not needing to run anymore. It's her breath on my throat, her hand in mine, her voice in my blood. It's this life we never asked for, but bled to keep. Thank you for staying until the end. If you're still here, listening, feeling, know this. Your presence is not a number, it's a heartbeat. It's the breath that keeps this story alive. Every time you like, comment, or share, you're not just helping a channel grow, you're whispering to the universe that these stories matter, that love, darkness, healing, and truth still deserve space in this noisy, broken world. And that gives me the strength to keep writing with everything I have. So if this story touched you, even in the smallest way, let it echo. Click like, leave a comment, even if it's just, "I'm here." Subscribe if you haven't yet. It's free, but means more than you know. And if you feel it, share this with someone who needs it, with someone who's forgotten how to feel, because maybe, just maybe, a single story can soften a hard day, quiet the chaos, or remind someone that they are not alone. Thank you, truly, and may you always feel welcome here.